My presentation explores the question, to what extent does educational inequality affect the success of students with disabilities? We will define disability and examine economic disparities and discrimination. A disability is any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for a person to do some activities and may lose out on an experience due to restrictions on how they interact with the world. There are many disabilities, some of which affect a person's vision, movement, and social relationships. An impairment is a lack of or difference in the structure or function of a person's body. People may have difficulty with mental functions if they have problems in the structure of their brain, for example. Inequality and poverty involving disabled persons is a global issue. According to the World Health Organization, 15% of the world's population, or 1 billion people, lives with a physical, sensory, intellectual, or mental health impairment that is significant enough to affect their daily life. People are not only born with disability or impairment, they may have been injured through accidents, violence, and diseases with potentially disabling sequelae. First, we will visit economic disparities. Economic inequality is the unequal distribution of income and opportunity between different groups in society. This is a global concern, and it is no surprise that people that are in poverty have little chance to climb up the social ladder, and as a result, their children and future generations are stuck as well, increasing the wealth gap even more. Educational inequality is the unequal distribution of academic resources, such as school funding, qualified teachers, books, and technologies to socially excluded communities. How does this happen? Parents, usually of minority groups that have low income, tend to settle down and buy homes within their means. This narrows down the communities and neighborhoods in which they can live. Of course, this is not their fault. The schools that are within these areas are often underfunded due to the long-lasting effects of discrimination. School districts with the highest rates of poverty are said to receive $1,000 less per student. So how does this relate to the success of students with disabilities? Impoverished and underfunded schools already lack the resources necessary to teach people without disabilities. Students with disabilities need more accommodations, whether that involves wheelchair ramps, visuals, braille, audio assist devices, or other resources. At home, these students may not get the help they need because their parents may not be able to afford qualified tutors, and their health insurance did not cover accommodative devices. Without qualified and experienced caretakers or educated peers, these students also lack a support system to keep them on task and keep them motivated to succeed. There are few data on school enrollment figures regarding children with disabilities, but some facts are known. There are between 93 and 150 million children living with a disability, and there are as many as 33 million children that are out of school in low and middle income countries. Education is very important to economic and social success. High school dropouts had 2/3 chance of getting a job. Minority dropouts only had a 4th chance of getting a job. About 16% of people with a disability did not complete high school. Though the percentage of disabled dropouts that get employed is not clearly stated by this source, 19.3% of people with a disability were employed. Taking a closer look at this graph, we can see that the employment percentage of 25 to 64-year-olds is a lot lower for people with disabilities, and even less when they have less than high school completion. This graph is also split between men and women. Women have lower employment rates across the board, but are fairly around the same number as the men if they have disabilities. These numbers are staggering, and we have to look further into the reasons why this is like it is. My second topic of discussion is discrimination, though it was touched on lightly in the prior section. Discrimination is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex, as defined by Oxford. There are many obstacles that prevent children and young people with disabilities from attending a mainstream school. Prejudices and social attitudes toward children with disability cause certain families to fear stigmatization and do not send their children to school. The total population of children that go through this is unknown. People may only recognize disabilities that are visible, and this inadequate data collection complicates the planning of an effective and inclusive education. Moving towards an inclusive education is a good start, but teachers need to be trained to provide that education, whether as a main mentor or assistant to another specialized teacher. Poorly adapted facilities is a significant obstacle. In rural areas with increased poverty, many school curricula rely on passive learning, such as copying from a blackboard and drilling that material in. Children with disabilities do not learn this way. There are many types of disability, and the type of disability influences the learning method. There is also a lack of resources. There is not enough accessible learning, especially when it comes to examinations and tests. Most international performance tests exclude students with disabilities. I wanted to add this quote from Morgan Freeman: "Attacking people with disability is the lowest display of power I can think of. I think it speaks for itself, so I will not expand further on that." But on a similar note, there is a statistic that only a third of medical school websites say they'd accommodate a student with a disability. This benefits no one. Physicians or any profession who have disabilities are more likely to serve patients or people like themselves. Admitting more disabled students to medical school or admitting more disabled students to any opportunity would enhance the entire nation's commitment to serving people with disabilities. Including people with disabilities would educate people without disabilities about the issues that people with disabilities face, a subject that many schools fail to do. The stigma surrounding disability is massive. Similar to discrimination in school, there is also prejudices and social attitudes towards people with disabilities in the workplace. Some disabled people may not have completed the education needed to take on certain jobs, or they won't choose to work at all due to possible harassment. If they do choose to work, they may work for a short period of time before quitting. A study on Parkinson's disease showed that 4 out of 5 participants reported that their disability made work more difficult for them, and only 15.3% worked for more than 5 years. Several participants in this study experienced a lot of stress before leaving work. The factors that affected these individuals also apply to other people with disability, including, but not limited to, the lack of trained employers, lack of support and interaction in the workplace, and a lack of early retirement and unequal pay. Disability discrimination is when an employer covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act or Rehabilitation Act treats a qualified individual who is an employee or applicant unfavorable due to them having a disability. The law forbids discrimination when it comes to any aspect of employment. It is also illegal to harass an applicant or employee because they have a disability now or in the past. In the United States, some workers with disabilities who have at least a high school education earns less than their peers without disabilities by 37%. For every dollar paid to workers without disabilities, those with disabilities receive only 63 cents on average. Although there is non-discriminatory compensation protected through the Civil Rights, Americans with Disability, and Rehabilitation Acts, the pay gap is still large. This is one of the factors that may prevent a person with disability to want to work. Equal pay is the key to keep disabled people economically independent and out of poverty. To what extent does educational inequality affect the success of students with disabilities was the question that we have been discussing. To conclude, the success of students with disabilities is impacted a lot by educational inequality stemming from economic inequality and discrimination. Students with disabilities not only have a hard time at school if they're attending school, but they also do not have the support system to continue due to the lack of social relationships and local community partnerships. Children and young adults with disabilities may choose not to go to school because they weren't declared by their families that fear stigmatization, no trained teachers, or a lack of resources. Inequality in pay may contribute to the demotivation of disabled people from completing school or attempt to be successful in a career. Despite the negative and staggering percentages discussed, all hope is not lost. There are ways to improve how education is done when it comes to students with disabilities. We need to define a policy for inclusive education in every city, state, and country by promoting social justice and implementing plans that favor inclusive education. Inclusive education means including students with disabilities in a mainstream school environment. In many countries today, children with disabilities attend ordinary schools but follow a specific curriculum. This may be a long-term process, but it is not impossible. Funds need to be allocated to working towards this inclusive education with the funds we already have. Investing on students with disabilities should be seen as equal to investing in children without disabilities. There needs to be facilities that allow students to be in mainstream schools, such as ramps, toilets, special equipment, and other apparatus that fits the needs of the different types of disability. Education is not a one-size-fits-all. Local partnerships need to be made to ensure that the community is doing its part to include and integrate students without disabilities. Parents and other adults need to be educated and to raise awareness of the importance of inclusive education and then normalize it. Another way to improve would be to ensure that the teachers have adequate training. It isn't effective to train all mainstream teachers to be fluent in Braille or sign language, for example, but pre-service training could be the solution for future teachers. Thank you so much for your interest and attention.